Session of the Senate and the second regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri, the Majority Leader, will lead the chamber in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to pray the Oratio Imperata. Merciful and compassionate Father, we come to you in our need to seek your protection against the COVID-19 virus that has disturbed and even claimed lives. We ask you now to look upon us with love by your healing hand, dispel the fear of sickness and death, restore our hope and strengthen our faith. We pray that you guide the people tasked to find cures for this disease and to stem its transmission. We thank you for the vaccines developed, made possible by your guiding hands. Bless our efforts to use these vaccines to end the pandemic in our country. We pray for our health workers that they may minister to the sick with competence and compassion. Grant them health in mind and in body, strength in their commitment, protecting us from this disease. We pray for those afflicted. May they be restored to health. Protect those who care for them and grant eternal rest to those who have died. Give us the grace in these trying times to work for the good of all and to help those in need. May our concern and compassion for each other see us through this crisis and lead us to conversion and holiness. Grant all these through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara,
Present.
Binay, Tano, De Lima, De La Rosa,
Present.
Dilon,
Present, baka hindi ako
Present.
Cayetano present,
No. No.
Gatchalian, Go,
Present. Perfect pa.
Gordon,
Present.
Ontiveros,
Present.
Lacson, Lapid, Marcos,
Present.
Pacquiao,
Present.
Pangilinan,
Present.
Pimentel III,
Present.
Poe,
Present.
Recto,
Present.
Revilla Jr.,
Present. Andyan.
Present.
Tolentino,
Present.
Villanueva,
Present.
Villar,
Present.
Zubiri.
Present po.
Senate President Soto III is present.
With 5 senators physically present and 18 senators virtually present, for a total of 23, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we defer the approval of the Journal of the 44th Session, Monday, February 8th, to a later hour. It's still being ready, Mr. President.
All right. If there's no objection, the journal's approval is deferred.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the reference of business.
Secretary will proceed with the reference of business.
Reference of business, bill on first reading, Senate number 2044, an act declaring the municipality of San Jose in the province of Batangas as the egg basket of the Philippines, introduced by Senator Villar.
To the Committee on Agriculture.
Resolution number 642, entitled Resolution Directing the Senate Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the rising incidents of online abuse and exploitation of children in the country, introduced by Senator Villar.
To the Committee on Women.
Additional reference of business.
There is additional reference. Go ahead.
Message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 8 February 2021, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 5777, an act taxing persons engaged in Philippine offshore gaming operations, amending for the purpose Section 25, Section 27, Section 108, and adding a new Section 125-A of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
House Number 8248, an act establishing an on-site in-city, near-city, or off-city local government resettlement program for informal settler families in accordance with the People's Plan and mandating the implementing local government unit jointly with the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development in case of near-city or off-city resettlement to provide other basic services and livelihood components in favor of the recipient local government unit, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 7279 as amended, otherwise known as the Urban Development and Housing Act of 1992.
Refer to Committees on Urban Planning, Local Government, and Finance.
House Number 8558, an act providing for a mandatory immunization program, repealing for the purpose Republic Act Number 10152, otherwise known as the Mandatory Infants and Children Health Immunization Act of 2011.
To the Committees on Health and Finance.
And House Number 8559, an act establishing a Parent Effectiveness Development Service Program in every city and municipality and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Women, Basic Education, and Finance. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have a resolution that we'd like to propose for adoption. I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 626. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. Consideration is in order.
May we ask the secretary, I move that we ask the secretary to read the title of the measure.
Title of the measure, and yes.
Resolution expressing the profound sympathy and sincere condolences of the Senate of the Philippines on the death of Gawad sa Manlilikha ng Bayan awardee Yabing Masalon Dulo.
Mr. President,
Yes,
may we
Majority
recognize, thank you, Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we recognize our distinguished chairperson of the Committee on Tourism, no other than Senator Nancy Pinay, Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader. The distinguished lady from Makati, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Bina, is recognized.
Mr. President, around midnight on January 26, one of our national treasures, a matriarch beloved by her community and beyond, passed away. In this moment of great sorrow, it is equally an honor to sponsor Senate Resolution number 626, expressing the profound sympathy and sincere condolences of the Senate of the Philippines on the death of Gawad sa Manlilikha ng Bayan awardee, Yabing Masalon Dulo. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, to peer into the life of Fu Yabing is to witness the stories of old come to life. Indeed, she was a bridge between worlds, transmitting the memories of an era long gone to the present. The honorific term bestowed on her, Fu, is a deceptively short word whose full meaning may be lost to those unfamiliar with her and her culture. She was a healer, a teacher, a master weaver and dyer. She was a conduit to the gods and spirits of her people, her work sacred, a gift from Furalo, the goddess of weaving. Like all the great artists of our time, the work of her hands was but one aspect of a truly compelling life. To be a weaver for her people, after all, required many things. She had to have technique and an eye for beauty. She had to have stamina and focus to power through back-breaking and dizzying work. She had to have an extensive knowledge of the forest, knowing what could kill, what could heal, and what could be used to transmit the memory, symbols, and hope of her people, and commit it to a medium that could withstand the passage of time. Fu Yabing had lived through many upheavals. She has had to watch the world she was born in vanish before her eyes. The thick forest of her youth razed, her community continually pushed to the margins, her people leaving their way of life. The story of Fu Yabing is a story of resistance. She desperately clung to the world that had sparked her imagination and shaped her life. She had persisted so that the way of the blind remained pure and was not made a casualty of change. We as a nation are much richer for it. Her tireless work had proved infectious. She had inspired her community to preserve an endangered way of life, sparking a renewed interest in an art that represented their struggles and joys. Mr. President, An artist is immortalized by her works. Indeed, thanks to the tireless efforts of our cultural workers who believed in the value of Fu Yabing's work, she will be remembered not only by her community, but also by her country, if not the world. We are made poorer by Fu Yabing's passing. Yet even in her death, she leaves us with lessons that will serve us well should we heed them. There is more to a people's art than what we see, hear, and touch. These products of intangible heritage represent a story of who we are. It is a narrative whose telling has not ended. Each one of us contributes, makes our mark, so that those who come after us may learn. To truly value Fu Yabing's life, as well as that of our other living treasures, we have to look beyond the beauty of their creations. If we are truly to appreciate the gifts of her hands, we have to ensure that the tradition lives on, that those that she has blessed with her wisdom would be able to share with us the history and aspiration embodied in what they create, that they benefit from it but are not exploited and commodified because of it. Pu Yabing's teachings guarantee that the world she has left behind can still marvel at the beautiful art of the Blan. Yet our enjoyment must not come at the expense of respect. Truly, amid all this, our objective should be to protect our indigenous peoples and allow them their place to flourish alongside us without imposing our beliefs and practices on them. We must continue fighting alongside them for their right to continue their way of life. Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, please join me in sharing this short video presentation prepared by by NCCA as a way to give honor and thanks to Manlilikha ng Bayan Yabing Masalon Dulo for the priceless heritage she has left to us and the far greater challenge to us as a people to preserve an endangered way of life that can withstand the changes of modern times.
Yabing Masalondulo is a Blaan Mabaltabi weaver from Mount Matutum, Polomolok in South Cotabato. She has been weaving for more than 80 years. Her work is considered by her community as done with mastery and fine detail. Her true age is yet to be confirmed, but it is believed that she is in fact 92 years old. The entire cycle of Mabaltabi is undertaken by a community or collective. From cutting the abaca plant, stripping and drying the abaca fiber, dyeing, setting the fibers onto a loom, weaving, pressing, and softening the woven textile. However, only masters such as Yabing take charge of ordaining the design of the tabi. The traditional motifs are crocodiles, the human form, and abstract land forms. The colors are usually red, black, occasional yellow ochre, and the natural hue of abaca. Natural fula or red dye is extracted from the roots and bark of the laga tree. Natural phytum or black dye is taken from the fruit, bark, leaves, and roots of the nalum tree. These trees grow in the mountain home milieu of the Blaan community. Yabing's patterns have practical applications. They can be seen in windows, doors, baskets, and other everyday items, not only in the fabrics she weaves.
Uyabing, maraming salamat po. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Angara po.
Senator Sani Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to commend our colleague and request, before that, I'd like to say that when I was watching the video, I was waiting for our majority leader to step out in his bahag, Mr. President. But since we are disappointed on that count, may I request if I could be made a co-author of her wonderful resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, may I just make an omnibus manifestation for everyone, Mr. President?
Senator
I'm sure-
Sabiri, Majority Leader, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure everyone would love to be, or would like to ask our sponsor if we can be made co-authors and co-sponsors of the measure, Mr. President, with the permission of Senator Binay.
Yes, she has given the thumbs up sign.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, thank you.
All right, the
Um,
Senator Villar. is recognized.
I just want to manifest that we relate very well to Yabing because we do weaving in Las Piñas for livelihoods. So I want to be a co-author of the resolution. Thank you.
All right, so be it. Thank you. Majority
Thank you,
Leader.
Mr. President. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We also appreciate the comment made by Senator Angara that he would like to see me in a bahag. But maybe for another time. But definitely when he goes to Bukidnon, we will also ask him to wear the Manobo tribe's uniform. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, levity aside, we have a lot of work to do today. I move that we transfer, Mr. President, from the calendar of ordinary business to special order. Senate Bill number 1741. I so move, Mr. President.
With due respect, may we
Yes, sir.
adopt the resolution first?
Oh, my apologies. My apologies. I got lost with my train of thought because of Senator
Because of
Angara.
Senator Angara, yes, I
I
understand.
know he's always giving us these jokes. Mr. President, I move that we adopt Senate Resolution number 626 with all members of the Senate as co-authors and co-sponsors. Thank you, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Chair hears none. PS Resolution 626 is hereby adopted. All right.
Maraming salamat po, sir.
Majority
Maraming salamat po, SP. So now we move to the other item on the agenda. I move to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order, Senate Bill number 1741. So move.
1741. Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the bill of Senator Villar. I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1741 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
2, 3.
Senate Bill number 1741, an act declaring the city of Davao as the cacao and chocolate capital of the Philippines.
All
May
right,
we
the motion
recognize,
is to,
Mr. President?
consider. It is now considered. You go ahead, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we recognize our distinguished colleague from Las Piñas, no other than the chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture and Food, Senator Cynthia Villar, Mr. President.
Senator
Thank
Cynthia
you,
Villar is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to sponsor Senate Bill 2023 because we have revised the Senate Bill 1741, declaring Davao City as the chocolate capital of the Philippines and Region 11 or the Davao region as the cacao capital of the Philippines. The bill seeks to recognize Davao as the country's biggest producer of cacao and its vital contribution in making the Philippines world-renowned and sought after by chocolate makers. Our justification of the Davao City and Davao Region Recognition Bill is based on the following. The proposed bill simply gives recognition for the pioneering, outstanding collective contribution of the cacao farmers who are mostly smallholder farmers who supply dry cacao beans to the processors and manufacturers, which are also mostly small to medium-scale enterprises locally and abroad. The works of these farmers have been measured in terms of volume of produce, with Davao region producing approximately 79% of the annual production of cacao in the Philippines, based on PSA data, or 6,703 metric tons in 2018. They have received international acknowledgement, evidenced by the awards they have gathered over the years. The chocolate from Davao has placed a spotlight on the efforts of Davao City and Davao Region in sustaining their cacao farms by promoting their cacao as a brand associated with the place where it is produced. Their program has created a positive impact on a local and global level, and they have shared it nationwide. Their best practices are now being replicated with location-specific improvements in other places in the country. It has stimulated an exchange of knowledge or mentorship, brotherhood, and kinship in growing and promoting cacao farming. The Davao farmers have worked towards helping other farmers to grow their own cacao farms and encourage improvement in planting, harvesting, drying, distribution, and packaging of their chocolate product, or to just produce more cacao beans. They have organized cacao-based cooperative, cacao nursery operators, propagators, traders, processors, and have tapped the academe in this pursuit that facilitated the development of the cacao and cocoa industry in the city of Davao and the whole Davao region. The volume of production, according to the Philippine Statistic Authority, is approximately 78.76 of annual production of cacao in the Philippines comes from the Davao region, composed of Davao del Sur, Davao City, Davao del Norte, Davao Oriental, Davao de Oro, and Davao Occidental. The total in 2019 is marked at 6,703 metric tons of dried beans. They are the top producer in terms of volume of production. There are also more than 20,000 hectares of cacao farms in the region, and Davao City, amongst the 5 provinces, has the largest area. It is targeting additional 16,703 hectares dedicated for cacao. Data from the industry players recorded and posted in the 2016-2022 Cacao Roadmap, the cacao production of the regions estimated as follows: Cagayan Valley, 4%, Northern Mindanao, 3%, Soxargen, 2%, Zamboanga Peninsula, 2%, Barm, 2%, Mimaropa, 2%, Caraga, 1%, Central Visayas, 1%, Eastern Visayas, 1%, Western Visayas, 1%, Bicol, almost 1%, CAR, almost 1%, and Ilocos region, almost 1%. The Philippines has about 10,000 to 15,000 cocoa farmers nationwide. The bill hopes to make Davao City and the Davao region become an inspiration and a benchmark to motivate other local government units to emulate. We understand the challenges the cocoa sector is facing, particularly the formidable upstream segments of the value chain. The lack of an adequate local supply of cocoa beans has undetermined the processing segment and led to several operations shutting down. Downstream firms cite the lack of stable production as a major constraint preventing growth or entry into the export market. They cited the lack of economies of scale. Production is still fragmented among many small farmers, creating problems of access to markets and decreasing their bargaining power. Moreover, the underdeveloped post-harvest fermentation and drying techniques lead to the reductions in quality and amount of beans suitable for processing. This still needs to be addressed. The local demand for cacao is 50,000 metric tons in the Philippines, while we produce only 8.5 thousand metric tons, which approximately is 80% is coming from the Davao region. In response, the local government of Davao City has allocated financial support to cacao industry to help solve these challenges by opening the Cacao City at the Pasalubong Center in 2017. It is a chocolate cafe that also serves as an outlet for cacao products, including chocolate, and also to support cacao farming, processing, research, and development. The city's goal is to provide opportunity to small entrepreneurs, farmers, and indigenous people to be major players in the cacao and chocolate industry. The city of Davao is encouraging and supporting small cacao farmers to join or form association or cooperatives to be able to access support from government and for economies of scale. They have access PRDP 1 or the Philippine Rural Development Project investment in rural enterprise and agriculture and fisheries productivity in this regard. Also, as part of developing their watershed, they have used cacao trees to support their agroforestry program. The city has a total of 162,000 hectares of agricultural land, 105,000 of which is intended for agroforestry development. The cacao tree has been considered as one of the trees to be cultivated in the upland areas, being a low maintenance crop and thrives well in the Davao weather and soil, and thrives well and which is cultivated in their upland communities by the IPs for them to earn extra income once these bear fruits. As part of the program, the city is now maintaining a 5-hectare central nursery in Malagos district and 8 satellite nurseries spread out in the barangays within the 5 watershed of Davao River: Lasang, Talomo, Lipadas, and Sibulan. This is to make the IPs effectively participate in the cocoa chocolate value chains. Their goal is to have a stable and larger supply of cocoa for the needs of the industry. The province of Davao Oriental, led by Governor Nelson Dayanghirang in 2020, sought fresh funding from World Bank Philippines to market fermented cacao beans produced by their farmers. This project seeks to involve farmers co-op in the 7 municipalities of the province to be led by Nagmasid agrarian reform cooperatives to produce quality beans and to set up post-harvest facility to meet international standards. The provincial government aims to ensure maximum income for their farmers. They have 3 objectives here. That is 1, giving livelihood for farmers. Number 2, livelihood for former insurgents. And number 3, for food security. This will benefit over 924 households. The Cacao Industry Development Association of Mindanao, Inc., or SIDAMI, is a non-profit based in Davao. It's also the leading cacao value chain organizer in cacao. Its membership is multi-sectoral, but mostly cacao farmers and cacao cooperative. It serves as the link between and among private and government sectors under NGOs and other cacao stakeholders across the country to facilitate the rapid development of the cacao industry. It also intends to empower cacao farmers through training and seminars on cacao. With the help of the Department of Trade and Industry, Davao Region, and the Department of Agriculture, SIDAMI was an active player in the crafting of the cacao industry roadmap. Cacao Connect, which is the biggest annual cacao and chocolate event in the Philippines, is organized by SIDAMI. It started in 2018, where different stakeholders in the country and international participants gather to celebrate and give recognition to the Filipino cacao farmers producing high-quality cacao seeds. SIDAMI, headed by Mr. Valente Tortur, crafted the module or curriculum for cacao production, nursery establishment, and management of crop breeding and post-harvest processing that will serve as an elective course under the technical vocational livelihood track for senior high school students. Clearly, the Davao region and Davao City have the biggest contribution in the cacao and chocolate industry development in the Philippines and deserve the proposed recognition. A Filipino farm grows one of the only 16 heirloom cacao in the world and the first in the Philippines. Puentespina Farms joined 50 other heirloom cacao farmers around the world from Bolivia, Ecuador, Hawaii, Costa Rica, Belize, Nicaragua, Vietnam, Tanzania, and Madagascar. Their cacao beans were submitted for evaluation and have been designated as heirloom cacao by the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund, an initiative of the Fine Chocolate Industry Association done at the ceremonies held in San Francisco last January 12, 2019. Malagos chocolate, single origin, 100% pure and natural fine flavored chocolate that is truly tree to bar. The Puentespinas started their cacao farm in 2003. Since then, it has gone on to attract international attention by supplying the fine quality dried fermented cacao beans that are used in the manufacture of the company's own chocolate brand, Malagos Chocolate. Today, Malagos Chocolate has won 28 international awards. The chocolate, which was commercially launched in June 2013, were made from the ethically grown and processed cacao beans that have been carefully graded, fermented, and solar dried in the Puentespina Cacao Farm in Malagos, Baguio District, Davao City. The farm covers 24 hectares of land with a diversified setup, growing a grade A Trinitario cacao beans, a crossbreed between Criollo and Forastero, and a variety of flowers and fruit, raise goats, and make artisan cheese. At the national level for cacao development, in August 2015, the National Cacao Industry Technical Working Committee was created to spearhead the cacao industry development and the organization of the 15 regional cacao industry development councils. They will represent there in the Philippine National Cacao Industry Council. The Philippine National Cacao Industry Council was created and made permanent in the Cacao Roadmap as the national structure that will spearhead the national cacao industry development. The council is composed of 40% public and 60% private sector representatives. Government representatives come from agencies involved in the cacao. The council is private sector led but co-chaired by the Department of Agriculture representative. There are two vice chairpersons, one from private and another from DTI. The DTI Region 11 is the council's secretariat. Tenure of office is for 2 years. Other government agencies involved are DOST, PCA, DNR, DAR, Land Bank, MINDA, and Small Business Corporation. There are 10 brands of chocolate coming from Davao, and they are the following. Number 1, Theo and Philo. Number 2 is Tigre y Oliva. Number 3 is Malagos Chocolate. Number 4 is Coco Dulce. Number 4 is Hiraya. Number 5 is Cacao Culture. Number 6 is Coco Dulce. Number 7 is Auro Chocolate. Number 8 is Magdalenas. Number 9 is Biao Agrarian Reform Cooperative together with Kennemer Foods International Inc. And number 10 is Cacao Dabao, put up by 25 OFWs. Our very own Senator Bato de la Rosa is establishing his own cacao farm in his home province of Davao Sur with the help of Mrs. Puentespina of Malagos Chocolate. Palakpakan po natin si Senator Bato. Other brands from other provinces are number 1, Risa Chocolate, namesake of our very own Senator Risa from South Cotabato. Cablon Farm from Tupi, South Cotabato. Lerio Chocolate from Rosario, Agusan Sur. Trina Texon from Negros Occidental. True Coach Chocolate PH Products from Negros Occidental. Alidanao Farms Cacao from Calbayog City, Western Samar. Bukaan Farm Training Center Inc., Salcedo, Ilocos Sur. Famous Chocolate Tablea from Batangas. Ginto in Bohol, Tangerine from Quezon, and Tablea Chocolate by Army Lopez Garcia, the present president of the Philippine National Cacao Industry Council, and she established the first chocolate cafe in Cebu in 2010. The other processors and exporter is Kasama Chocolate in Vancouver, Auro Chocolate Halal Certified, established our first retail store of chocolate in Tokyo. Mr. President and my dear colleagues, I am hopeful that you will be one with me to this measure. Thank you, Mr. President and fellow senators. God bless and stay safe.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
to co-sponsor the measure, may we recognize the chocolate man himself, and with his own chocolate farm, no other than Senator Bato Ronald De La Rosa.
Senator Ronald De La Rosa is recognized to co-sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Majority Leader, thank you. Mr. President, I would like to thank the chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, our esteemed colleague, Senator Cynthia Villar, for sponsoring Senate Bill number 1741 under Committee Report number 163. As mentioned by our principal sponsor, this measure seeks to officially recognize Davao City as the chocolate capital of the Philippines and the entire Davao region as the cacao capital of the Philippines. Bilang isang taga Mindanao, pangalan para sa akin ang tumayo sa harapan ninyo at sponsor ang panukalang magbibigay karangalan sa bayan na aking pinagmulan. Mindanao, especially Davao, is known to be the fruit basket of the Philippines. Whenever you think of Davao, you might picture durian, pomelo, mangustin, tuna, President Duterte, or the Kadayawan Festival. As a native of Davao region, I can proudly say that we are more than that. The Davao region produces and exports banana, pineapple, mango, and coconut, among others. Recently, Davao City has also come to boast of a booming world-class cacao and chocolate industry. Cacao is one of the trees that grow only in the countries located in the tropics near the equator, called the Cocoa Belt. The Philippines, being one of these tropical countries, took advantage of its location on the map and pioneered the planting of cacao in Asia. Mr. President, from starting out as a pioneer cacao planter, the Philippines is now a respected exporter of premium quality raw cacao and chocolate. Sa katunayan, Mr. President, yung paborito kong tsokolate mula sa Malagos, Davao City, ay nanalo na ng 7 major international awards para sa kanilang mga tsokolate. Noong 2017, nanalo rin ng second place ang Malagos chocolate sa 100% unsweetened dark chocolate drink category. At third place naman sa sweetened dark chocolate category. Sa prestigyosong international chocolate competition na isinagawa ng Academy of Chocolate sa London. Hindi na po Swiss o Belgian chocolate ang hahanapin ng mga chocolate lovers all over the world. Philippine or Davao chocolate na po. Mr. President, this bill does not discount the fact that there are other regions and provinces in the country that produce quality cacao. Hindi po dahil taga Davao ako ay ang aming rehiyon lamang ang aking pupurihin. Let's give credit where credit is due. According to data from the Department of Agriculture, 10% of the national cacao production is shared by Luzon and Visayas. Another 10% from the rest of Mindanao, while majority or 80% of our cacao comes from the Davao region. At tulungang pagyabungin ang industriya ng kakao sa bansa. Surely, Mr. President, the region that provides more than half of the cacao of the country's cacao and the city that transforms cacao into delicious chocolate. This to for with high with our and growers, including my who is her native and to them that we owe the honor we enjoy today, the honor of producing chocolate that ranks among the world's best, truly deserving of chocolate's other name, food for the gods. Needless to say, we are not gods, Mr. President. However, enjoying every piece of smooth, bittersweet chocolate derived from Davao cacao certainly helps us to come quite close. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. In timing, it's already the Valentine's season. Baka pwedeng pasample, Mr. Senate President, galing sa kanila. Sample ng kanilang tsokolate. But, Mr. President,
In other words, you are telling Senator De La Rosa to walk the talk.
kasi award-winning po yung kanyang tsokolate, we'd like to try his bittersweet chocolate. But Mr. President, before I refer the speeches of the two colleagues of ours, I just like a little bit of trivia to our chairperson, Ma'am Cynthia Villar. The Puentes Pina family and I are very close. One of their members, Bo Peep, was actually my classmate in animal science at UP Los Baños, and the wife Olive also was a sis of mine. They're both actually my sis in our organization in the UP Ranchers Club in UP Los Baños. All three of us were part of the rodeo team of UP Los Baños. And then ever since then, we became close. Nakita ko talaga how they developed the cacao into not just a raw material for chocolate, but the creation of chocolate delicacies as well. Kaya I'm so happy that you honor them today. Their mother, by the way, Tita Charita, was key in preserving the waling-waling orchids of Mount Apo. They breed waling-waling, and Davao is very known for their waling-waling orchids. Unique only to Davao. Nowhere else in the world. Kami sa Mount Kitanglad, wala po kaming waling-waling. Davao lang po, Mount Apo, may waling-waling. I'm not sure if I'm wrong, mistaken about that, but I know it is unique to endemic to the Davao region. Kaya thank you for mentioning their family, Madam Chairperson. With that, Mr. President, while we are awaiting the sample of their chocolates, we move that the speech of the lady senator from Las Piñas and the gentleman from Davao be referred to the Committee on Agriculture, Mr. President. I so move.
No,
No.
I'm sorry.
this is
I'm
this is a
sorry.
sponsorship.
It's a
So
sponsorship.
perhaps,
My
we would like
apologies,
to
Mr.
give our
President. Again.
colleagues a chance to review to study the measure.
Yes, yes, to
And we
suspend
can
the
suspend.
measure. I forgot. I thought it was a privileged speech because the sound of the speeches were like privileged speeches. Naka-idlip ako yata ng konti. Mr. President, my apologies. I move that we suspend consideration of the measure while our colleagues study the measure a bit further. My apologies, Mr.
All right.
President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have several items on the agenda for interpellation. May I ask a 1-minute suspension just to confer with our minority floor leader, Mr. President?
All right. Session suspended. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have two measures by Senator Sherwin Gatchalian that are listed on the agenda, Mr. President. I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1955. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order. 1955.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we recognize the sponsor, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, and
Senator,
to
yes.
interpolate, I would like to request our colleagues if they have any interpolation on this measure. This is on the
Senator Sherwin
national
Gatchalian is
energy.
recognized in the period
Thank you,
of
Mr. President.
interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Who is interpellating? Is there any member
There are no-
registering?
From the minority, Mr. President, there are no members who wish to interpolate the measure. I would like to ask the members of the majority if there are any members who wish to interpolate. If not, we will close the period of interpellation, Mr. President. There are no members, Mr. President, who wish
Mr.
to interpolate.
President.
May we recognize Senator Pia Cayetano, Mr. President?
Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, Majority Floor Leader, I think I mentioned to you last week that I have a number of bills that I reserved for interpellation, but I would be needing time to study it because I just finished create. But I don't mind that we move on to the period of amendment because I actually have a bill on inclusive education. I'm a big supporter. The sponsor knows this. So at most, I would probably be just proposing amendments. So I will not delay the interpellation. But if I could maybe be asked, if I can ask for, I'll probably ask a few clarificatory questions during the period of amendment just to propose my amendment, if any. I might not even have any.
Yes, Mr. President, just for clarification, is this for the learners with disabilities? I think we're taking up right now the LPG. LPG gas industry.
Sorry. Yes, no. I'm talking about inclusive
The second
education.
item.
Sorry about
Yes.
that. Sorry. So
No worries.
nothing for LPG. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to Senator Cayetano. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we close the period of interpellation for Senate Bill number 1955. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpellation is closed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, move to open the period of amendments if they are ready.
Period of amendments open. Are there any committee amendments?
Yes, Mr. President. Let
You
me
may
just get
proceed.
my notes. BJK. Mr. President, we have actually a lot of amendments, and this is in line with my consultation with the Good Minority Floor Leader to simplify as well as to not to overregulate the industry. So we took the suggestions of the Good Minority Floor, and accordingly, we will be deleting some of the provisions that we think
Substitute bill ito.
can lead to simplification of accreditation and issuance of permits, and we will also delete some provisions here to simplify the said bill, Mr. President. So with the kind indulgence of the body, Mr. President, this is a little bit long, but it will definitely yield to a much simpler, less regulated, and streamlined LPG industry, Mr. President.
Yes, indeed, we will need the intelligence of our colleagues. This is a 24 pages of amendments. But just for the record, Majority Leader, this is the period of individual amendments because it is a substitute bill and therefore there are no committee amendments. So
Yes, that's
without
correct, Mr.
further
President.
ado, we ask Senator Gatchalian to proceed with these amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me just start already, Mr. President. On
Yes,
page,
you can start. There are no amendments on page 1.
no, page 1, Mr.
All
President.
right, we go to page 2.
So on page 2, delete the lines 30 to 32. On page, I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 3, delete the lines 1 to 4 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 3, in lines 12 to 16, replace the entire sentence starting with the word alteration in line 12 and ending with the word relabeling in line 16.
Delete.
Replace, Mr. President.
With what? Replace with what?
And let me read the sentence, Mr. President.
Yes, proceed.
Adulterated LPG refers to the mixing of LPG with any finished or unfinished petroleum product or stock, or with any non-petroleum substance or material that will result in product quality change or resulting in the failure of the LPG to meet the required product specifications under the Philippine national standards. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. Adopted.
On page 3, line 20, delete the phrase authorized or appropriate. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Okay. On page 4, delete the lines 16 to 18 and re-letter the corresponding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 5, line 3, after the word public, insert the phrase period. It also refers to an injurious, comma, unsafe, comma, or dangerous LPG cylinder. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 5, line 6, delete the word import. I so move, Mr. President.
Import. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 5, delete lines 18 to 21 and re-letter the succeeding subsection accordingly, Mr. President. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
This amendment is to clarify, Mr. President, on page 6, after line 6, insert a new subsection which reads LPG cylinder buyback refers to the activity wherein an LPG cylinder owner purchases LPG cylinders bearing its trademark or trade name from an LPG industry participant as part of the process of LPG cylinder swapping at a price determined under the LPG cylinder exchange and swapping program, semicolon. And re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly, Mr. President. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
This amendment is for clarity, Mr. President. On page 6, after line 9, insert 2 new subsections. The first subsection reads as LPG cylinder improvement refers to activities such as repair and rehypen qualification to ensure an LPG cylinder is compliant with all applicable Philippine national standards that would render it fit for use and circulation, semicolon. The second subsection reads as LPG Improvement Program Fund. LPG Cylinder Improvement Program Fund refers to the amount set aside by LPG industry participants to defray the cost of LPG cylinder improvement under the LPG Cylinder Improvement Program, semicolon, and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 6, line 13, replace the word repair with the word improvement. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 6, line 16, replace the word repair with the word improvement. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 6, line 18, between the word act and the comma, insert the phrase which were not illegally imported and are not defective, comma, injurious, comma, unsafe, comma, or dangerous. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 7, line 10, insert a new on page 7, after line 10, insert a new subsection which reads, measuring devices refer to the equipment utilized to determine the weight of LPG cylinders, comma, which are periodically calibrated and sealed by the concerned government agency, semicolon, and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
This amendment is to ensure consistency with Republic Act number 4109 or the Standards Act. So on page 7, delete lines 18 to 21 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 7, line 22, for the word PNS, insert the phrase Philippine National Standards, then enclose the word PNS in open and close parentheses. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
This amendment is for clarity, Mr. President. On page 8, after line 29, insert a new subsection which reads, seal manufacturer refers to any natural or juridical person engaged in the production of LPG seals, semicolon, and re-letter the corresponding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 8, line 31, delete the phrase PS or ICC, and after the word mark, insert the phrase from the DTI, such that the entire sentence now reads, substandard refers to any pressure vessel which does not conform with the applicable PNS and does not bear a safety and quality mark from the DTI, semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
This amendment is for clarity, Mr. President. On page 9, after line 4, insert a new subsection which reads, terminal refers to a facility used to import, comma, receive, comma, unload, comma, and load LPG from local or foreign sources, period. It is equipped with a port, comma, jetty, comma, and other infrastructure, semicolon. and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 10, on page 10, line 3, delete the word "and." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 6, replace semicolon with comma "and." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 10, after line 6, insert a new subsection which reads, open parenthesis, small Roman numeral, 3, close parenthesis, centralized LPG piping systems, semicolon.
Any
I so move, Mr.
objection?
President.
Hearing none, adopted.
On page 10, line 5, after the word, on page 10, line 15, after the word disposal of LPG, insert the phrase, comma, LPG contaminated water, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 10, line 16, insert the word "n" after the comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 22, replace the comma with a semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, delete lines 23 to 30. I so move, Mr. President.
23 to 30.
Yes, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, adopted.
So, Mr. President, this amendment is to remove redundancy. On page 11, delete lines 5 to 6 and re-letter the corresponding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 11, line 10, replace the phrase "the following colon" with the phrase "any violation of this act by any LPG industry participant, comma, pursuant to Chapter capital Roman numeral 9 of this act, semicolon." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Page 11, delete the lines 11 to 17. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 11, line 26, between the words "act" and "shall," insert the phrase "which were not illegally imported." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objections, adopted.
On line 12,
Page 12.
on page 12, delete lines 12 to 14 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so
Hearing-
move.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, line 9, delete the word "and." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, line 12, replace the semicolon with comma "and." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, after lines 12, insert a new subsection which reads as open parentheses, small Roman numeral 3, close parentheses, centralized LPG piping system, semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, line 14, replace the word "a" with the phrase "the necessary." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, line 15, delete the words "of accreditation." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, lines 17 to 18, replace the phrase "through the issuance of a PS license or ICC certificate" with the phrase "pursuant to its powers under Republic Act number 4109. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, lines 24 to 25, replace the phrase "PS license, comma, ICC certificate, comma, and a certificate of accreditation in the case of qualifiers of LPG pressure vessels, comma, whichever is applicable," with the phrase "the necessary licenses and certificates pursuant to its powers under Republic Act number 4109. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 13, lines 26 to 27, replace the phrase certificate of accreditation, comma, PS license, comma, and ICC certificate, comma, whichever is applicable, comma, with the phrase issued licenses and certificates. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 14, line 29, insert the word "and" after the semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 14, delete lines 30 to 32. And on page 15, delete lines 1 and 2 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly, Mr. President. I so move.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 15, line 30, delete the colon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, line 1, delete open parentheses, delete open parentheses, A, close parentheses, and replace the capital letter A in the word assist with a small letter A. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 16, line 3, replace the phrase semicolon and with a period. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, delete lines 4 and 5. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On the same page, line 15, replace all words importer with the phrase LPG industry participant. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On the same page, line 17 to 19, replace the phrase starting with the word that in page 17 until the word and. Sorry. Let me repeat, Mr. President. On page 16, line 17 to 19, replace the phrase starting with the word that on line 17 to. On line 17 until the word tama ba? Until the word end in line 19 with the phrase the following it imports, comma, procures, comma, utilizes, comma, manufactures, comma, constructs, comma, operates, comma, and sells are compliant with the PNS, comma, standards adopted by DTI as PNS, comma, and other standards, comma, requirements, comma, and guidelines promulgated pursuant to this act, colon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, line 19, insert two new subsections.
Again. Page 16,
On
line
page
19.
16, line 19, insert two new subsections.
Mhm.
The first subsection reads as open parenthesis, small Roman numeral number 1, close parenthesis, LPG, comma, LPG pressure vessels, comma, ancillary equipment, comma, facilities, comma, auto hyphen LPG conversion shops, comma, auto hyphen LPG dispensing stations, comma, and centralized LPG piping systems, comma. And the second subsection reads as open parenthesis, small Roman numeral number 2, close parenthesis, marine vessels and motor vehicles used to transport LPG and filled and unfilled LPG pressure vessels, which should be in safe operating condition at all times, semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, line 20, replace the period with semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, after line 20, insert two new subsections. The first subsection reads as open parenthesis, letter C, close parenthesis, ensure the drivers and attendants of the motor vehicles it utilizes to transport LPG and filled and unfilled LPG pressure vessels have been oriented on its proper handling, semicolon, end. The second subsection reads as open parenthesis, letter D, close parenthesis, enter into contracts or agreements only with LPG industry participants registered with the DOE or with a valid license to operate, whichever is applicable. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, line 24, insert the word "and" after the semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, delete lines 25 to 29 and re-letter succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 16, line 32, replace the semicolon with a period. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 17, delete lines 1 to 5. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On the same page, delete lines 10 to 12 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On the same page, line 15, insert the word "and" after semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 17, delete lines 16 to 20. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 17, line 29, insert the word "and" after semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On the same page, delete lines 30 to 31 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 18, delete lines 6 to 7 and re-letter succeeding subsections accordingly.
Hearing,
I so move, Mr. President.
hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 18, lines 14 to 15, delete the phrase PS or ICC. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 18, line 20, delete the phrase PS or ICC. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 18, line 21, insert the word "and" after semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On same page, delete line 22 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 18, line 25, replace the word "weighing" with the word "measuring." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Adopted.
On page 19, line 16, insert the word "and" after semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 19, delete the lines 17 to 22 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 19, line 26, replace the word "weighing" with the word "measuring." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 19, delete lines 29 to 30 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 20, line 2, replace the word "weighing" with the word "measuring." I so
Hearing no
move.
objection, adopted.
On page 20, delete line 6 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 20, delete lines 9 to 12 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly.
Hearing no objection,
I so
adopted.
move. On the same page, Mr. President, line 15, delete the phrase PS or ICC and insert the word "and" after semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 20, delete line 16 and re-letter the succeeding subsection accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 20, line 19, replace the word "weighing" with the word "measuring." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On the same page, delete line 28 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move.
Hearing no objections, adopted.
On page 20, line 29, replace the word "weighing" with the word "measuring." I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 21, line 3, insert the word "and" after semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 21, delete line 4 and re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 22, line 15 to 16, replace the phrase "import commodity clearance certificate, certificate of accreditation, and the Philippine Standards License" with the phrase DTI certificates and licenses. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 22, line 18, delete the phrase and cartridges. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 22, lines 18 to 19, replace the phrase an ICC certificate, comma, certificate of accreditation, comma, or PS license, comma, whichever is applicable, comma, with the phrase applicable the applicable certificates and licenses. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 26, line 6, between the word market and the colon, insert the phrase which were not illegally imported and are not defective, comma, injurious, comma, unsafe, comma, and dangerous. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 26, line 22, after the word database, insert the phrase, comma, which shall be open to the public, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 26, line 32, between the word DOE and the period, insert the phrase colon, provided, comma, that it shall not include trade secrets and other proprietary information. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 27, line 12, after the word act, insert the phrase which were not illegally imported. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 28, line 5, after the word field, insert the phrase and field, and unfilled. I so move, Mr. President. Sorry, insert the phrase and unfilled. I so move, Mr. President.
After the word field.
After the word field.
Any objection, adopted.
On page 31, delete lines 1 and 2 and re-letter the corresponding subsections accordingly.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 31, delete line 11 and re-letter the corresponding subsections accordingly.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 32, delete the entire section 40 and renumber the succeeding subsections accordingly.
Is that a
I
motion?
so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 32, line 25, replace the comma after open parenthesis, a close parenthesis, a close parenthesis, with the word and delete the phrase comma, open parenthesis, DD, close parenthesis, comma, and open parenthesis, Roman numeral number 2, close parenthesis. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 33, line 7, replace the letter JJ with the letter HH. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
Still on page 33, line 25, replace the letter GG with the letter FF, replace the letter HH with the letter GG, and replace the letter MM with the letter KK. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 34, line 9, replace the letter EE with the letter DD and replace the letter FF with the letter EE and replace the letter LL with the letter JJ. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 35, line 7, replace the letter KK with the letter II. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
On page 36, line 8, delete open parenthesis A, close parenthesis. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
And lastly, Mr. President, on page 37, delete the phrase starting with the word amount in line 9 until the word such in line 11, such that the section now reads, the amounts necessary for the sustainable implementation of this act shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act, period. I so move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, adopted.
That's it, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a request from our colleagues with a number of amendments made. If we can come up with a clean copy and study the clean copy before we approve it on second reading. So with that, Mr. President, I move to close first the period of amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of amendments closed.
So move to
The
suspend
secretary
consideration.
is directed to furnish the members copy of a clean copy of the amended version.
Thank you. Before I suspend, Mr. President, may I just ask a question to the good sponsor, if he may be allowed, if I may be allowed to ask him. I know the period of interpellation is closed, but it's more of a clarificatory question.
Yes,
To the
Mr.
good
President,
gentleman.
pardon willingly from the good majority floor leader, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I may, I just want to ask, I know this bill, ever since I was a congressman, this bill keeps going to Congress, Mr. President, and it's always been tackled every Congress. How come it has never been passed and only now I guess taken up this far, Mr. President? Was there some controversy about it, if I
That's a
may
very
ask?
good question, Mr. President. In fact, Mr. President, the first time that this bill was filed was during 13th Congress. No, that was year 2004, Mr. President. And one of the root causes of the delay is the funding of the cylinder improvement program, Mr. President. Because as we speak right now, there are about more or less about 2 million to 6 million, no, because it's unregistered generic cylinders out there. And the generic cylinders are very dangerous because this LPG is highly flammable and it's a highly regulated product. To get those generic cylinders out of the market, somebody has to recover that. So in the past, the industry participants or the LPG players were encouraging government to fund that cylinder improvement program. But this time around, we managed to convince the industry players to fund it themselves. So in other words, government will not release a single centavo to fund the cylinder improvement program, in which the improvement program will remove all the generic cylinders from the market. It's now the industry players who will fund that removal of the generic cylinders, Mr. President. So that's
So it's-
the primary reason, Mr. President.
Yeah. So it's like a fight between the big players and the small players. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Not necessarily, Mr. President. Uh, the generic cylinders, Mr. President, in the past were allowed to come in because we didn't have manufacturers of cylinders. And when these generic cylinders came in, a lot of them were not requalified, meaning they were not pre-certified by DTI. So a lot of these generic cylinders became unstable and unsafe. And to remove them, because a lot of these generic cylinders are also in the homes of our poor constituents. So we cannot just penalize them by letting them or mandating them surrender the generic cylinders. It should be the LPG manufacturers who should get those generic cylinders. But the LPG manufacturers wants the government to pay the consumers. But in this, during the period of during the hearings, we told them that if government will release the money, then this bill will not happen. So finally, we managed to convince them to put a fund. No? All of this will be drawn out of the industry players to remove the unsafe cylinders from the market.
Mr. President, just a quick, just for clarification. So I know the big players have their own cylinders and they're practicing actually all the safety protocols needed for the LPG industry, if I'm correct. But it's the small players out there, I believe, that are practicing well, have questionable or iffy safety records. Would you know how many are the large players and who they are, and then as well as the small players who initially in the first few hearings in the other previous congresses there were small players that were opposed to this measure. Could you give us a number of or the number or the figure of how many industry players are considered the big players that are compliant against to the smaller players?
Pero yung big ones are two lang talaga. Okay. Okay. I'll just flash a slide, good majority floor. No, there are two refiners in the Philippines. No, so they import raw materials and they refine it and convert it into LPG. But there are 177 medium-sized to small-size LPG brand own. We call it brand owners in their lingo, brand owners. So these brand owners can import finished products, refill it, and sell it to the consumers. So the breakdown is basically there are two refiners. These are the Petron and the Shells, and there are 177. We consider medium size to small size players, Mr. President. These are the Isla Gas, these are the Price Gas, and all of these brands, Mr. President.
During the hearings, Mr. President, what was the stand of the small brand owners? Were they in favor of the measure, or?
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, we had a very inclusive hearing because LPGMA, which is the party list of the dealers and the party list of retail outlets were there, and there were also a group of refillers, a group of brand owners were there. They were well represented, and you're absolutely correct. When this was filed in 2004, there was an impasse. No? And the impasse is who will fund that improvement program, and they cannot agree, no, on who will fund it. So finally, when we were hearing this bill, we told them that this bill will not pass if you will still insist that government will fund it. So finally, they agreed, no, that they will fund the improvement program. So they were well represented, Mr. President, and I found out that if you see the different categories, all of those categories have their own organizations and associations, and they were very active in the hearing and the technical working groups.
My only worry lang, Mr. President, or my dear colleague, is you see the retail outlets are numbering about 15,000 and several thousand of these small players. I'm worried that in places like Mindanao and in the Visayas and Northern Luzon, in the outskirts, no, in the different regions, baka the small players ay dehado, and the bill may come out more difficult for them, where they have to replace their whole stock with newer cylinders, which may force them to close shop. Would that be a scenario that you see, Mr. President? When you say somebody is going to pay for their cylinder replacements, are you talking about Petron and Shell, or the industry players themselves, those who are like Price Gas and all the other small players will also replace the cylinders for their outlets?
Mr. President, the participants who will put up the funds will be the refiners primarily and the brand owners, because in the bill, when they collect the generic cylinders, they have to requalify it, meaning make it safe or reaccredit it, and then put their brand. So it will be primarily the refiners and the brand owners. As to the small retailers and dealers, they have an association. In fact, they were represented by Congressman Arnel T, who represents dealers and retail outlets. They were well represented in that hearing, and we made sure that their interest is also protected in this bill, Mr. President.
Thank you, and I know the good gentleman has the heart because at this time of the pandemic, these small and medium enterprises all over the country dealing with LPG, because I know they franchise that out, Mr. President. I know many of those dealers are actually franchises of larger players in given to certain areas, certain cities, certain municipalities to sell their product. So we just don't want to put them sa alanganin, baka maalanganin po sila and they end up closing shop because they cannot afford themselves to be the ones to replace the cylinders. So that's welcome development on the part of the good sponsor, and we'll await the amendments that were proposed by the committee, and we'll study this to make sure that all bases are covered, and it's a win-win scenario for
Yep.
the safety of our people, the safety of the individuals, as well as the livelihood of all these dealers, Mr. President. I
You're
thank you.
absolutely
That's all
correct
I had to ask.
with majority floor. In fact, I've been to some of the conventions, no, because in Vismin and also here in Luzon, they're very well organized. In fact, I attended a convention of all dealers and retail outlets in Panay Island, and they're huge. No, we're talking about thousands of dealers and retail outlets, and they're very well organized. In fact, this regional and even provincial organization culminate in a national organization. And what I observe with this industry, because they're very well organized from the different categories, that they perform check and balance among each other. So the big refiners cannot push their way to the small dealers, and the small dealers actually can participate in policy making as well as in the laws that we are making. So it's a very well organized group, considering that LPG has been there for decades, and still right now it's LPG is the fuel of choice for cooking. 40% of our households use LPG as a mode of cooking, Mr. President. So it's very popular fuel of choice in the Philippines, primarily because of its cost. No? It's very cheap.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you to our dear colleague, my dear colleague from Valenzuela. Mr. President, I have no further question, and we move to suspend consideration of the measure while we await the clean copy of the amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration on, well, I beg the indulgence of our dear colleague, Senator Gatchalian. I believe Senator Pia still has questions on the learners with disability. Sen Pia, would you just like to ask the questions tomorrow? We can move the tackling of this measure tomorrow if you're ready by tomorrow.
I actually, because the previous measure was quite lengthy, I was able to review my questions. So I leave it up to His Honor to decide. It's not a lot. It just lays the basis of possible amendment. It's his pleasure, Mr. President.
Maybe we can tackle it today. I believe the other two bills on our agenda, which will be sponsored by Senator Richard Gordon, I believe he's in a family emergency, so I don't know if he can sponsor the measure today. So I believe Senator Gatchalian has most of the floor, Mr. President, but we can tackle his bills today. So if it's all right with Senator Tia, Mr. President, we can tackle the questions that she would like to ask and propound for this measure, Senate Bill number 1907, Mr. President. With that, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1907.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 1907 is in order.
Thank you, Mr.
Would
President.
you mind a few minutes of break?
Yes,
Majority
Mr. President.
Leader?
We
Let's
can
have,
take
I think
a
Senator
Senate.
Gatchalian was standing for more than an hour. So
Yes,
session
I move
suspended
to
for
suspend.
1 Senate minute. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have with us today as well Mr. Senator Richard Gordon. He's with us, joining us today online. So, Mr. President, may I just ask for a 1 minute suspension, Mr. President? I was just conferring with Senator Gordon before we went online. Can I just ask for a 1 minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Thank you very much,
Majority
Mr.
Leader.
President. Before we tackle other measures, we would like to just give our deepest and sincerest condolences to the family of Senator Richard Gordon for the passing of his dear brother, who was a very, very good friend of ours, many of us. He was a classmate of ours in Congress. This is Congressman Bong Gordon. Mr. President, again, our deepest and sincerest condolences to the family of the Gordons, Mr. President.
Thank you. Makes you
Yes.
also a long-serving mayor of Olongapo and a strong, stalwart volunteer during the turnover and during the Pinatubo eruption. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. Our sincerest condolences to the Gordon family.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, moving forward, we'd like to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1907 under Committee Report number 134. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none.
The bill before.
Motion's approved.
This is the instituting services and programs for learners with disabilities, Mr. President. We would like to recognize the sponsors, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, and to interpolate our distinguished colleague, Senator Pia Cayetano.
Yes, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. It's recognized. And
you.
to interpolate, Senator P. Cayetano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pagod na po ang Majority Floor Leader ho natin.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the
Sorry,
permission
Mr.
of the
President.
sponsor-
I've been off today. Today was an off day for me. I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Yes, strike 3 for you. Huh?
Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsor, may I ask some clarificatory questions which will allow me to...
Yes, Mr. President, it will be
also
an honor
yes.
to receive questions, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'll try to make this very brief. Just to confirm with His Honor some salient provisions of the bill. Section 2. Not verbatim, no sense.
Mr. President, if with the kind indulgence of Senator P picking up earlier, and I
Oh,
missed the President.
sorry about that. Is it clear? Am I clear now?
Now it's clear. Now it's
Yeah.
clear, Senator.
So basically, I was just referring to Section 2 and Section 5 that basically says that education of learners with disabilities shall be compulsory and accessible, and that we will ensure the non-deprivation of the rights of access to inclusive, equitable, and quality education. That's Section 2. And then I quoted Section 5 that no learner with disability shall be denied admission and inclusion in any public or private or early basic education school. No? So I'm just confirming that these are two important provisions in the bill.
Yes, Mr. President, these are actually very important substantive concepts of the bill, Mr. President. And the reason for that, Mr. President, is we want our schools to be the haven for inclusive education, Mr. President. And right now, Mr. President, unfortunately, the concept of inclusive education is quite selective. No? For our public school, there is a policy for inclusive education. However, the services, the training that necessitates that inclusive education still is a big deficiency in our public school. However, our public school has been trying to practice inclusive education, but this bill will now enable them to practice it fully by giving them the necessary support, Mr. President. As to the private school, Mr. President, if our public school is mandated to practice inclusive education, our private schools should also do the same, Mr. President. And unfortunately, it became quite convenient for some private school to not accept students because their reason is they're not ready, or they have a lot of deficiency in terms of knowledge. But we have to make it a point that it is the responsibility of the school, to practice inclusive education and to make sure that they are capable and their teachers are ready and they have the necessary support to give our learners with disability, Mr. President.
So my understanding here is that there are two important components, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, no? One is you want the financial support, obviously, to be able to fund all of these interventions that need to be done to have a efficient education program for special learners, correct? So one would obviously be the funding, the recognition that this is important and that we need to fund it. Would that be correct?
Well, Mr. President, the first is the policy of inclusive education
Yeah,
should be
that was my
practiced.
second. So I just broke down the question, but one would be the recognition that we need funding for learners with disabilities, and the second would be the policy of inclusive education. Is that correct? I rephrased it instead.
Yes, correct, Mr. President. The policy of inclusive education should be practiced in all of our schools, regardless whether it's public and private.
Okay.
And the support that should be given to those schools in terms of, for example, learning resource centers, specialized teams, and specializations, Mr. President.
Okay. So what you are veering away from now, so what doesn't change is that because you and I both fought for His Honor,
Yes, Mr. President.
sponsor and I both fought for the budget of special education in the last budget. No? So with the support of our chair of the Committee on Finance, no, our goal was to keep that budget separate so that it doesn't get eaten up by the regular education budget, right? So we both fought for that, no, because we recognize
Correct,
that
Mr. President.
the needs of these learners with disabilities is distinct, and we have to really fund that. So we're on the same page with that. On the other aspect, which is to ensure that every education institution, every basic education institution offers inclusive educations and no learner would be turned away. That is where I want to ask a few clarifications, no? I don't know if His Honor is familiar, but I had a child with severe special needs. he was born blind and deaf, and I was told that he would never walk nor talk. And he also had medical conditions. So assuming, for the sake of argument, that my son's brain was not damaged as well, that he had the regular capacity as a child, within the range of normalcy in his age group, then I would put him in a school, obviously, and I had been preparing for that since the moment I learned of his condition when I was still pregnant. But I beg to ask, how would a child like mine, who is blind, deaf, cannot walk and cannot talk, survive in that kind of inclusive environment? And just to not to belabor the point, but in other countries where they have specialized, they have the teachers, they have the equipment for this. Those similarly, maybe with similar or otherwise complex needs as my son's, would be difficult to put in a regular classroom setting, and they would be put in another classroom setting where their needs would be better attended to. So how would that work in this bill, Mr. President?
Mr. President, one of the most important feature of this bill is the Inclusive Learning Resource Center, wherein we will have specialists there that will assess the needs of the learner with disability. And depending on what type of need or what type of needs that the learner with disability will need, then they will come up with recommendations on how to achieve full participation in society as well as in the classes, Mr. President. Of course, the level of needs will be dependent on the disability, Mr. President. And the end goal here is to the end goal really is to the end goal is for the student to participate in classrooms, to participate in education, and hopefully at one point the student will graduate and participate in society. But towards that participation, Mr. President, we need to have interventions, especially on the needs of that student. And this is where the Learning Resource Center will play a very important role, because it will be staffed with specialists. It will be staffed with rooms that will help with the intervention. And in some cases, Mr. President, like for example, in Valenzuela, the end goal there is to let the student participate in classrooms. But in doing so, we built specialized classes within the school, Mr. President, because there are sometimes that student will need one-on-one tutoring, will need speech therapist, will need other interventions, Mr. President. So this bill will now promote inclusive education, but it will give also the flexibility to our teachers, our specialists, to suggest how to move towards that. If you ask me if that will happen, it will really depend on the student, Mr. President. It will really depend on the development of the student, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, in the case of my son, if again, assuming that his mental capacities were not affected by his condition, which by the way is called trisomy 13, so it was affected. If he was just blind or deaf, under your bill, a school would be mandated to include him in the regular classroom?
Yes, Mr. President, as much as possible, Mr. President.
That's my point. That's my point. Yung as much as possible. Remember, he's blind and deaf. So upon the time that you pass this law, we passed this law because, by the way, I'm a supporter of this law. Just to make it clear, that's why my questions are really meant to address very specific situation, and I have personal knowledge because of my own child. How would you be able to ensure that a school would have the capacity to deal with both a blind and deaf? And like in the case of my son, let's even assume that hindi severe yung kanyang mental difficulties, because my son's was severe. So let's say hindi severe, pero blind and deaf. How would you assure that? Because basically, if you ask me as a mother who could afford, yes, I would like him or her, well, my son was a boy, to be in a school where he has a group time, he would develop social skills with his friends. but he definitely would need more one-on-one time than group time. And I don't know how his development would be fast-tracked to be in an inclusive setting, especially in the first few years or maybe in the first decade, where I doubt if there will be special education teachers available. And you said that there is a resource center. To fully diagnose that, you really need a developmental pediatrician, and we have a handful only in the country. When my son was born, of course, this was 19, 20 years ago, I think we only had 5.
Mm.
So I don't know, maybe we have 50 now. So I'm really approaching this from a very practical standpoint. I do not judge the schools that have turned away children with special needs, because my mom is a teacher. I grew up in her classroom. I regardless in the house, will continue to have the manner
Sorry.
not giving child is for him.
I'm sorry,
Here
Senator.
was
Senator Cayetano. We lost you after you said you grew up with her in her classroom. You broke up. You started
yeah, I
breaking
grew up with my
after
mother
that.
in the classroom.
You started
Can you hear
breaking
me
up
now,
after
Mr.
that.
President?
Yes, Mr. President.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Senator Cayetano, you're coming in clearly now.
Yeah. So basically, that's my concern. That I do not believe that you can guarantee the best education for these children's special needs through inclusive education alone, through that avenue. And what I would like to ask His Honor is, where is the provision here in the bill wherein you assure that a child would be getting the kind of intervention separately and not necessarily in the same classroom as needed? And number 2, that the teachers would also be getting the support they need to manage the children with special needs. Because, yun nga, I was saying, my mother was a teacher, and if you have 2 or 3 students with ADHD or whatever, one teacher cannot really, in a classroom of 25 students, cannot necessarily handle that. And then one last point, I'm just throwing it all out there so His Honor can digest my scenarios differently. My son, a different son now, my 10-year-old son now, had a best friend who migrated to the States. And he was pulled out of regular class and put into special class for about a year. And at first, the mother was quite disappointed because of that, because he was lagging behind daw in math. Merong may deficiencies in his understanding. But now he is actually a state awardee for math, precisely because he was pulled out of the regular classroom and put in a special class so that he could catch up. So what I'm asking His Honor is, where are the provisions that ensure that both the child and the teacher have the support that they need, so that this child can be attended to and the other needs of the students will still be attended to as well?
Thank you, Mr. President, for that. And those are very good observations and also very good comments, Mr. President. Mr. President, we did not specify in the bill exactly on what to do with different scenarios, Mr. President. What we specified in the bill is the concept of inclusive education and towards the end goal of full participation and full participation and full participation and inclusion to the society, Mr. President. But in the bill, we didn't specify the different interventions that will be needed by different disabilities, Mr. President. As to the teacher support, Mr. President, we included in the bill, Mr. President, on Section 10, pre-service and in-service training, Mr. President, because it's important that all teachers, even general education teachers, will have enough training to approach learners with disabilities, Mr. President. One of the issues that came up in our hearings and 10 technical working groups, Mr. President, is the problem of a lot of our teachers are not trained on how to approach learners with disabilities. Their confidence level is not there. So at the pre-service level, we will already train them and make sure that they have enough knowledge to handle and to approach learners with disabilities, Mr. President. So, but as to going back to the first question on the different approaches or the different interventions, we didn't specify that, Mr. President. We gave the school, DepEd, as well as practitioners leeway to come up with different interventions, Mr. President. And the goal is the most important in this case. Striving towards the school is very important, and the goal of full participation and full inclusion to our classroom is the end goal, Mr. President.
Thank you. If I may just interject at this point, I understand, Mr. President, but that is the essence of my issue with the way that the bill has been presented since the 16th Congress, which was the time that I was the chair of the Committee on Education, without any provision whatsoever assuring that it is okay for the school to have separate facilities when needed. It becomes the burden of the school to provide for that inclusionary scenario for all students, which I'm telling you, with the very case of my own child, is quite impossible. So that's what I want to address, because otherwise you will be presenting both public and private schools with scenarios where they would be constrained to accept because we dictated it under the law, and that it may be quite impossible in certain circumstances, like the case of my child. He could, I mean, like I said, yes, I would be very happy, and my goal would for him to integrate in society. So that means, there would be a lot of activities that he should be included in. But he could not have the same math classes. He could not have the same science classes. He could not have the same writing classes because he's blind and deaf. That's my point. So that's why I'm not asking for you to carve out every scenario of every particular disability or different abled scenario, but you must provide the policy that recognizes that this situation does exist, and there are times and places where a typical SPED center would be more beneficial to the child and to the teacher and the other children as well. Hindi mapapansin yung anak ko dun sa senaryong ganun.
Mr. President, another important feature of the bill is the individualized education plan, which was lifted actually out of your proposal, Madam Senator. And the individualized education plan is the starting point, Mr. President. And to come up with this IEP, a thorough assessment of the child is important to assess what type of intervention is needed, what type of support is needed. And there will be cases, depending on the diagnosis and assessment of the child, there will be cases that the child will spend more time in the learning resource center, more time with one-on-one classes. There'll be cases like that. And I've seen that in Valenzuela, wherein we have a lot of students there that spent almost 90% of their time in our learning resource center. In fact, some students spent almost 100% of their time there. But the end goal of our center in Valenzuela is full inclusion. We designed our IEP for them to be included, to somehow have the potential to be included in our general education classes, Mr. President. So we will not do away with the other interventions that is necessary. The most important here is number one, the assessment and the diagnosis of the child. And based on that, the school will now design, the specialists in the school will now design the necessary intervention for that child. And like I said, the goal here is full participation. But if that will not happen in the near future, because the child needs to spend a lot of his time in the center or to some specialist, that will be included in the IEP, Mr. President.
Thank you. So in principle, what I gather from His Honor, the sponsor, is that he understands the concern that I raised,
Yes,
but
Mr. President.
I do not see this written in the bill. So that is what I would like His Honor and his committee to look into, where you can carve that out. Like you might want to say something like, this is without prejudice to the needs of the child, which may be better catered to in outside of the classroom or one-on-one or something, because otherwise it does give the impression that there's only one scenario you're painting, that they're all inclusively in the classroom. And again, I will reiterate, this is the point that I don't believe His Honor addressed, the preparation of the teachers and the additional manpower that is needed to achieve that. Because let's just say, again, my child, he would need a different teacher to teach him Braille, okay? He would need another teacher to teach him how to what do you call this, occupational and physical therapy, to maybe I don't know if he would have the ability to walk if trained, or to walk with support. So all of this may take more time than the regular subjects of the student. And so yes, the individual education plan is a step in the right direction. That's why I recommended that. But again, I go back to the human resource necessary to correctly make an individualized education plan. It goes back to the developmental pediatrician, of which we only have a handful. A SPED teacher technically just gets directions from these developmental experts. So my point in all this, Mr. President, is to really look at what the entire needs are before we mandate. So what are these needs? How many developmental pediatricians do we need in the entire country to be able to address that? What are the support systems that are needed so that these children are properly diagnosed and those teachers are equipped to be able to do that? And what is the budget involved? I would actually propose, and again, these questions of mine are all for the committee and his chair to consider, so that we can propose. I can work with His Honor on amendments. What are the budgetary requirements going to be? Because I'm 100% sure we cannot meet it in the first year, despite His Honor's effort and mine. Hindi natin nadagdagan, di ba? All we were able to do was to say that paki-exclude itong budget na dapat talaga for itong special learners natin. Huwag niyong ihalo sa bulk ng budget para hindi mabawasan. But we were not even able to add to it. So I would think maybe it's best if we say, can we have a 10-year timeline? And what do we need every year, so that by the time we hit 5 years or 10 years, all the schools have this kind of intervention programs, facilities, etc. Because that to me would be a meaningful program, because otherwise we set ourselves up for disappointment. You'll have all these parents, and I know what it is like to be a parent with a child with special needs, to expect that the schools are supposed to deliver because we passed this law, and yet they will not be able to deliver. And the truth is, as bad as it may sound, the child's need may not only not be met, but in the classroom setting, the teacher might have to use her entire attention for the need of that one child versus the need of the 24 other children. That is the reality if you have children with special needs, because nga they have special needs.
Yes, Mr. President, we recognize that. In fact, when I was the mayor of Valenzuela, we recognized the various specialists that we need in order to come up with an assessment and diagnosis of the child. And that's why we included that. In fact, we included all of those specialists in the bill, Mr. President. And we gave the Learning Resource Center the flexibility to choose what type of specialist they need in order to come up with support and the assessment to the child, Mr. President. In the bill, Mr. President, there is support for manpower. There is support for specialists, Mr. President. We recognize that. In fact, we even created a mobile, we call it a mobile disciplinary team, because not all LGUs and jurisdictions will have the luxury of hiring them. So we will have mobile specialists that will go around. And we recognize that problem, Mr. President. In fact, in Valenzuela, as much as we want to hire developmental pediatricians, we can only get consultants. And because that's the best we can get right now. I know it's very difficult. Nevertheless, in the bill, we put all those specialists because we recognize the importance of those specialists. And another core feature of this bill is getting those specialists and making it available to our poor families, because unfortunately, only the ones who have the luxury of going to the brand name hospitals will have access to this specialist. Our poor families will not have the opportunity to access those specialists. That's why in the bill, the learning resource centers will be open to all families with with disabilities, and especially our poor families who really need this specialist, Mr. President. So it's in the bill, Mr. President, and if Your Honor sees that we need to make it more pronounced and make it more relevant, we are open to improvements and refinements in the bill, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. I would just like to, on that point out that we'll ask the gentleman if they actually have the numbers of specialists that you need. How many projected developmental pediatricians do you need? How many teachers who specialize in special education do we need? How many teachers assistants do we need? Because unless you have that number, it's just going to remain a dream in that bill. We know that very well. His Honor has worked with me on the budget, and it's not gonna, without clear goals as to how many of these we need to provide plantilla provisions for, how much funding needs to go into this. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen soon. It's not going to happen soon after we make the law. So I would really like that built into the law. I'd like the numbers spread into the record, and then I'd like whether it's a DepEd working with DOH, whoever, to be mandated to come up with those specific targets, and for NEDA, DOF, DBM, and all of them to work together to ensure funding for that. Because again, like I said, it's difficult for any parent to see the dreams they have for their children or their children's own dreams, not being fulfilled. But when a mother or a father has a child with special need, that difficulty is double, triple, because you already know, nang panganak mo pa lang siya, ang dami ng obstacles. And what I do not want to happen is we give false hope, because in paper it looks so good, and yet it will not get funded because we're not clear about who is responsible to ensure that this gets funded, who pinpointed the number of specialists we need. So when His Honor said in Valenzuela, the most you can do is consultants, and I would assume for most of the cities, even in Metro Manila, hanggang ganun lang. Paano pa sa probinsya? It's very similar to our goal to ensure that the Filipinos have access to doctors. Let's put a goal there. Let's be very specific, because we need to tell DBM and DepEd and DOH that this is the goal. We need to have this number of specialists who will assist in this inclusive, who will make this inclusive education come true. Otherwise, you might want to change the, sorry, I didn't mean to, otherwise you might want to simplify the goals or make it more reasonable and say that the goal for the first 3 years is to have one in every province. The goal in the 5 years is to have 3 in every province, and within 10 years to have it in all cities and first-class municipalities. I don't know. I'm not dictating what it is, but I think the goal should be clear-cut, because it's such a heartache for a parent to think na ito na may pag-asa, and then it's not going to happen, because it won't if we don't spell it out. That's my concern.
Yes, Mr. President, we recognize the challenges of getting the specialists. In fact, that's always been the challenge. And in fact, even though we have the specialists, attracting the specialists to work in government is also a challenge. So what we included here in the bill, Mr. President, is the crafting of a roadmap, Mr. President, to make sure that the policymakers, the DBM, people who have control over the budget will recognize this roadmap. This roadmap will be promulgated by DepEd and the stakeholders, Mr. President. And we included here also an advisory board. And this is a plea of the stakeholders to give them a voice in crafting the roadmap, in crafting policy. They're not going to be compensated in our bill. You just want representation and their voices to be heard. Now, as to the roadmap, Mr. President, is a very important feature. Admittedly, this cannot happen overnight, may not happen in 1 or 2 years, but the roadmap will analyze the entire situation. No? The supply of specialists, the demand for specialists, the demand for what type of needs our students will require. These will all be put in a very detailed roadmap. And that roadmap will now prompt the legislators as well as the executive in allocating the necessary budgets to fulfill that roadmap. It's very challenging. In fact, outside of this bill, Mr. President, and you're absolutely correct, the budget is the biggest challenge. And it's not our intention to give false hope, Mr. President. Our intention is to give hope to our learners with disabilities and their parents. And that hope will come from the vision that we are now embodying in this bill, Mr. President. In a lot of our debates, especially in working with Her Honor on the budget, we will have our own advocacies. We lobby very hard for important programs and projects. And if this bill becomes a law, then it's a signal for us to make sure that the goals of this bill and the dreams of our parents will be fulfilled. It's not going to be easy because you're absolutely correct that the demands to support our learners with disabilities far greater than the general education learners. But at least this bill will give hope to our parents and to our learners with disabilities, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. I would request His Honor for the data, no, the amounts that
Yes,
would
Mr.
be
President.
required so that we can help craft the wording. I still feel strongly because I totally understand and appreciate His Honor's sincerity in providing hope for these parents. But my warning was simply that in our desire to create hope, and in our inability to control what finances will actually be allocated for us, then we might create false hope. And that is what I'm guarding against. Not that we intend to create false hope, but that is what we might end up providing if we cannot substantiate the vision that we have in this bill with the necessary funding. So I think it is important that no matter how rough it may be, we estimate what kind of funding requirements we're looking at. And a lot of it will be HR and trained HR in order to roll this out properly. And I do feel that there may be benefit of putting timelines so that on the face of the bill, people are on the law when it becomes a law. People are also apprised as to how complex this goal is. Not everybody thinks that way, Mr. President. Sasabihin lang nila na, pinasa niyo yan, tapos wala pala, o asa na. You know what I mean? So I'm really trying to put reasonableness in the craft, be reasonable in the crafting of this bill so that the expectations, so we meet the expectations of the parents who already have a burden to carry because of the special needs that their children have, no? The burden to find these specialists to really be able to bring out the best of these children. One last point, and I don't really require an answer. His Honor may answer quickly, but it is also something I would like to be reflected in the bill. The role of para-teachers or teachers' assistants and also parents in all this. I mean, many of the children that have special needs also have emotional needs. Some maybe because that is the need that they actually have on the emotional side, but others develop that need precisely because of their physical or mental differences that they have, that then they can only trust or cling to their parents. And thus the role of para teachers, teachers assistants, or like other non-teaching personnel, including parents, would be important. Because in one meeting that we had with DepEd, we were told that only licensed teachers may actually teach in a classroom setting. I'm a little bit confused with that, because His Honor may recall that we also had budget meetings, and His Honor was always present in my budget hearings meetings and even the SDG hearings on the future of education. And they also said that they welcome the para teachers or teachers assistants. So I'm a little bit confused on how they see the role of these non-teaching assistants, including the parents, because they must play an important role. So maybe we can get clarity on that also, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the number of specialists that we will need to fulfill this law, Mr. President, we didn't put exact numbers and exact targets on the law, Mr. President, but instead we put a provision there for the development of a roadmap, Mr. President, because I know it's very difficult and a lot of this will be subject to budgets, Mr. President, but the roadmap will be the goal, and the bill will serve as the framework and the hope that will drive that goal, Mr. President. So it's important that we know where we're going and how much will it take for us to get to that goal, Mr. President. So that's the reason why we didn't put hard numbers in the bill and timeframes in the bill. But we welcome any suggestions, Mr. President, that will enable us to fulfill this law to its maximum, Mr. President. As to the para teachers, Mr. President, we included in the law hiring of teacher aides. And during our technical working group, I recall that one of the resource persons made a comment on supporting our teachers with teacher aides or para teachers for that matter, Mr. President. So there'll be the para teachers and teacher aides will play a very important role in this bill. The teachers will the para teachers will support the special needs of our learners with disabilities. At the same time, will also support the delivery of education in the classroom, Mr. President. So we included here a provision to employ teacher aides and other necessary talent to fulfill this law, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I truly believe that His Honor's is in the right direction. I hope His Honor recognizes that my goal simply is to try to clarify and be as specific as possible. I also believe in flexibility, but the specificity that I am asking for would, I believe, add clarity to the bill, especially when it becomes a law. So with that, I will just I can end my interpellation now. I will no longer pose any further questions. With the permission of His Honor, I will ask our staff to coordinate with each other, for possible the data that I want, and then maybe crafting of amendatory provisions. And obviously, I am very open to His Honor just proposing his own committee amendments that address these concerns that I raised. Thank you very much.
But let me put on record, Mr. President, that the inspiration of this bill came from Her Honor's original inclusive education bill, Mr. President. And I've read that bill, and it's a fantastic bill because it's innovative and it's modern in terms of promoting inclusive education in our education system. In fact, inclusive education, especially addressing the needs of our learners with disability, is in constant evolution. I talk to a lot of specialists. I talk to a lot of our resource persons, and to my analysis, it's evolving, but evolving to the better,
True.
Mr. President.
True.
And that's why the inspiration of this measure came from the original proponent, from Her Honor, from her original inclusive education bill, Mr. President. We included a lot of comments from our resource persons, especially modern concepts that will support our learners with disabilities, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. And I end my interpellation now. Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr.
Majority
President.
Leader.
Mr.
Yeah,
President.
we with the indulgence of our colleagues, and I also consulted Senator Joel about this. Maybe we can suspend the interpellations till tomorrow for this measure so that we can tackle the bill of Senator Gordon. We all know we'll be very busy tomorrow if it's all right with our colleagues and the sponsor. So with that, Mr. President, I believe Senator Joel and Senator Risa would still like to ask clarificatory questions. Therefore, I move to suspend consideration of the measure, Mr. President, for tomorrow.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is the measure suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2027 under Committee Report number 166. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order. 2027.
Yes, this is an act granting the President of the Philippines the power to defer the increases in contributions of the social security system, Mr. President, during times of the pandemic. We are in the period of interpellation. May we recognize the sponsor, Senator Richard Gordon, and to interpellate the distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Franklin M. Drilon, Mr. President.
The gentleman from Zambales is recognized, Senator Richard Gordon, and to interpellate the minority leader, Senator Frank Dillon.
Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension to ask the good gentleman from Zambales to go online. I think his video has some technical difficulties. 1 minute suspension, Mr. President. Very quick suspension.
Session suspended. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, may we recognize now the sponsor, Senator Richard Gordon, and to interpellate our minority floor leader, Senator Franklin M. Drilon. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Drilon is recognized to interpellate the sponsor, Senator Richard Gordon.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Will the sponsor yield the floor to a few clarificatory questions?
Then esteemed Senator, Mr. President, Senator Dillon.
Mr. President, the records of this chamber will show that 2 years ago, almost to the date, on February 7, 2019, Republic Act 11199, or the Social Security Act of 2018, became effective. And these were amendments to the existing law then. And I recall that the good sponsor sponsored the same measure, and this representation raised questions in order to provide a legislative guide in case the questions would arise on the law. Just to put it in context, Mr. President, the sponsor will recall that the previous Social Security Act, or Republic Act 8282, required the approval of the President in various stages of the implementation of the law then. For the President's approval was required for the Commission to adopt, amend, rescind rules and regulations of the Social Security Commission. The President's approval was required to establish a provident fund, which will consist of voluntary contributions. The President's approval was needed if when the Social Security Commission compromises or releases any interest, penalty, or civil liability to the SSS. In other words, the way it was framed there, then the law, the Social Security Commission could not do anything without the approval of the political leader. And this is precisely why the Social Security Commission came to the chamber and requested us to change the policy so that under Republic Act 11199, we removed, or the chamber removed the requirement for the approval of the president in all these aspects of governance, but also authorized the Social Security Commission to conduct continuing actuarial and statistical studies and valuations to determine the financial condition of the SSS, and taking into consideration such studies and violations and limitations, to readjust the benefits, contributions, premium rates, etc. Now, would the sponsor agree with me that under the present law, the Social Security Commission has the authority to readjust the contributions, because the term readjust is broad enough to include a suspension or deferment of the increases in the contributions? Is that a reasonable interpretation, Mr. President?
It could be a very reasonable application, Mr. President, because remember, you and I were the ones working on this very, very well. We wanted to make sure that SSS was removed from the clutches of presidential control, which sometimes went awry. And now, normally I would say yes, they would, but because this is a peculiar situation that might bring us back to the previous situation, we are just limiting this power for 1 year, 6 months, up to another 6 months, because of the prevailing unstable situation brought about by the fact that many people have lost their jobs and cannot find work. So we're just doing this to make sure that there is some leeway upon which we can act. But the president can no longer do what it used to do in the previous law, Your Honor. The president can just make the adjustment for this particular period. That's why we limited it to 6 months, renewable to another 6 months. 420,000 Filipinos have lost their jobs. 4.5 million are affected by the flexible work arrangements. And we're just thinking, we're not even saying we should be the one to stop it, nor the SSS, but we're just saying if the president finds it fit to suspend it, to defer it, then we will give him the power, because there's no power under the present law for him so to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. We will go into a more detailed analysis of the proposed amendment later on, but just on this point, just to establish that under the present state of law, the Social Security system has the power to defer the increases in the contribution rates.
The law as written empowers the SSS to readjust the premium rates, Mr. President. That is my thinking on the matter. But just to readjust. But I would imagine that if they did, somebody might question again that the president is being given the power. But really, that's why we made the 6 months limitation.
Yes.
So, yeah, sure. I would imagine that they could readjust. The SSS could readjust the premium rates.
Yeah. And we are, the committee has reported this bill for plenary debates and approval because the Social Security Commission was not in favor of suspending the increases under Section 4A of the law. Is that a correct a correct statement? In other words, while the commission is indeed authorized under the law to readjust, and it's broad enough to include suspension, they are not inclined to do so.
Yes, Your Honor, I agree with that because I spoke with them. They were not really keen on suspending it. But in the event that this situation continues to go south, where people lose their jobs and have no work, we just wanted to make sure that the president would have some leeway to be able to make the adjustment. Besides, Mr. President, there's a cushion because if this is over, if we pass 2021, when we start again in 2022, the rate will still be the same, 13%, Mr. President.
Yes.
Gentlemen, because of a technical difficulty, give us 30 seconds. We suspend the session for 30 seconds.
Yes.
May continue, Senator Gordon and Senator Drilon.
Yes. Mr. President, as we said, the present law allows the Social Security Commission to suspend and defer increases in the contribution rates, but they are reluctant to do so as confirmed or as confirmed in the hearing of January 26 of this year. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And the commission believes that will threaten the solvency of the fund of the system, and will put on the viability of the system as a whole from a actuarial point of view.
Yes, Your Honor. Actually, they said that they would incur loss of 15.4 billion pesos, Mr. President. And their projected increase, if the increases were to go on, they would forego that. And if it's not implemented, they will lose 41.37 billion, Your Honor.
But okay, so there is this. Our social security system is confronted with this very dangerous and difficult financial situation. But nevertheless, because of the pandemic, we are giving the authority for the president to suspend the increases.
That's correct, Your Honor. But we're not telling them to suspend it. It's up to the president so to do. The Congress will not do it, and I think the SSS will not do it. Although the lower houses, they can empower the SSS subject to the recommendation of the Secretary of Finance. And you and I know that we put the Secretary of Finance as chairman of the SSS. So that's why we're leaving it up to the President, Mr. President, to the incumbent almighty to make the decision. I know that.
The other way of putting it is, ayaw natin masisi kung ano man mangyari.
I could not have said it better, Mr. President.
I did a bit of analysis of the proposed amendment, and I have a few observations. First, the increases, the provisions says, the President of the Philippines shall have the power to suspend or defer the implementation of increases in the contribution rates of the Social Security system mandated in this section. Now, the section mandates increases not only in January of 2021, but also in future years, every January 1 of each year until 2025. Now, will the mandate of the President be limited to the increases only in January, on January 1, 2021, which is a 1% increase? Or does it include all situations in the future when another pandemic strikes us? The way, Mr. President, I read the proposed amendment, it's not limited to the increases due on January 1, 2021 and in January 1, 2022. But it is a general grant that can be called upon in cases of national emergency or national or state of calamity. Would the gentleman agree with that on my reading? Or is it intention only to limit it to the increases in the immediately succeeding years?
The intention, Mr. President, is to limit it for 2021. And by 6 months, if there should be a need, another 6 months. And as far as this representation is concerned, if they're going to increase it again, if they feel that they have to suspend, I would imagine that they would need another power from another mandate from the Senate and the lower house to be able so to do, Mr. President.
Yes, so that at the appropriate time, maybe we can amend the proposed amendment so that it is very clear that it is limited only to these 2 periods. Now, again, because of the broad language of the proposed amendment, it can even cover increases that were decreed 2019 and 2020. That is not the intention, Mr. President, just for the record.
No, definitely not, Mr. President.
All right. Now, the power to defer or suspend refers only to the increases mandated in January 2020 and January of 2021. The power does not include the authority to defer the contribution itself,
Yes.
just the increases, and the increases only on January 1, 2020 and January 1, 2021, just to be clear.
That is quite correct, Your Honor.
The provision, just again to clarify, can only be invoked, the president can only invoke the power to suspend only where there is a national emergency. Is that correct?
Or a state of calamity, Your Honor.
Or national state of, firstly, the state of calamity refers to a national state of calamity because we know that it is very common that there are state of calamities declared locally. So that does not include that the state of emergency declared locally does not give the power to the president to suspend the increases.
You cannot suspend that, Your Honor, because that's a local thing, and so far as this is concerned, this applies only to a national state of calamity.
Right. So the appropriate amendment can be included to make clear that it is a national state of calamity, not as national emergency and national state of calamity. Now, now, the provision also states that the suspension may be extended for 6 months. Mr. President, suppose in 6 months' time there is no okay. Is it necessary that is it a condition that there must still be a state of calamity at the time the extension is decreed?
I quite agree with that thinking, Your Honor, because this is really just was a national state of calamity. And if the national state of calamity is gone, the president loses that power.
Okay, now the present state of calamity, if I recall correctly, ends on September 25 of this year, if I'm not mistaken.
I am not quite sure about that. Let me check, Your Honor.
Assuming that is correct, my question only is the president cannot exercise this power beyond September, assuming September 25 is the end of the calamity.
Yes, Your Honor, he cannot be allowed anymore because the raison d'etat is no longer there, Your Honor.
Okay, so the limitation is the existence of a state of emergency or calamity.
Yes, Your Honor.
That's the limitation on the power of the president to suspend or defer the increases.
It's always very comforting that the minority floor leader is able to expand and explain the very purpose of the law, because in case there's any question later on with the Supreme Court, they can look at our debate, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Yes, it is just in our effort to clarify and to clarify the language, because in my simple mind, the language can be subjected to various interpretations, and the intention of the good sponsor may not be necessarily reflected in the way this provision is crafted. Finally, Mr. President, there is a proviso here that the power shall be subject to consultation with the social security system and the affected members and key shareholders. What does this exactly mean?
Well, Your Honor, these affected stockholders could mean, for example, the shipping companies. They have a different ball game altogether because their payment schemes are different from those land-based, Your Honor. So it's always good for them to be consulted. We are a democracy. They can be consulted, and in fact, they should be consulted so that the right decisions can be made, Mr. President.
Yeah. And if there is no consultation done, can the exercise of this power be questioned?
If there's no
What?
consultation, Mr. President, it can be questioned because the law says consultation.
Yeah, because you can always consult and ignore, Mr. President. That is the difficulty of this kind of a language.
Sabi niya, finally.
Huh?
Well, for so long as there's consultation, even if they ignore it, there is consultation, Your Honor. So they have the people have been heard, and if he doesn't do so, he does so at his own political peril, Your Honor.
So just for the record, the lack of consultation will not result in the invalidation of the exercise of the powers granted under this proposed measure.
Well, the consultation is needed, Your Honor, but he doesn't have to. He can still make up his mind. Just like in the JBC, we are consulted, we recommend, then he chooses somebody else, Your Honor. That has been done very often, too often, in fact.
All right.
There is a request by the Secretariat that we suspend the interpellation, if you don't mind, gentlemen. There is a technicality that we will have to look into, if you don't mind.
Not at all, sir.
All right, the session suspended. Majority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, after consulting with the minority floor leader, he's willing to terminate his, well, we'd like to recognize the minority floor leader, Mr. President, for
All
his.
right, Senator Drilon,
his few questions.
recognize. I recall you said finally, something like that towards the end. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have asked all the needed questions and established the appropriate premises for the appropriate amendment that we will propose in order to reflect the intention of the sponsor of the bill. The only issue that is hanging to my mind is the matter of the proviso of consultation. We really could not understand this, Mr. President. In the first place, you do not consult the system. You either consult the commission and the stakeholders. I do not know how you propose to consult the system. The system is the whole body of structure granting social security benefits. The system is run by a commission. So I don't know with whom the consultation will be made. And consultation with affected members and key stakeholders to me is a very broad description that it is susceptible to interpretation. But anyway, this is the only issue that is in my mind left hanging, which is vague, but we will just attempt to propose amendments to clarify this because this is very loose language. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And with that manifestation, we're willing to terminate our interpretation.
All right, thank you, the minority leader, Senator Drilon. Senator Ralph Recto, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, just a few questions, just a clarification from the sponsor, if he is willing.
I'd like to thank Senator Drilon. As usual, I humbly accept his observations, which are very intuitive and can only serve to clarify and make the law better. And I have told my staff that we must listen to him every time he speaks because even I learn a lot from him. Thank you, Mr. President.
Would the sponsor be willing to answer just a few questions?
I'm willing to learn with my good friend, Senator Ralph Recto, even if he's from the other school, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. Just a few items for clarification. Isn't it today we are collecting already roughly 12%? Yeah, starting 2020, 8% from employers and 4% from employees. The monthly salary credit minimum is 2,000 and the maximum is 20,000. Is that correct?
The gentleman is correct, Your Honor. We've been collecting 12% since 2020.
Correct. And the measure at hand today is that we are saying we're giving the president the authority to suspend collection for 1%. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
The increase of 12 to 13, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And that 1% will be divided 0.5% by the employer and 0.5% from the employee.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. So if you take a look at the minimum and the maximum, we're only really talking about 10 pesos to 50 pesos per member.
Yes, Your Honor. You're very correct.
Okay.
You're the mathematical wizard of the Senate.
Okay, so it's 10 to 50 pesos per member. Okay, now, what the aggregate number that we are discussing here is how much?
Let me see.
Meaning to say, according to the SSS, if we do not suspend the collection, how much would they have been able to collect in 2021?
It would have been 41 billion, Your Honor. 41.37 billion, Your Honor.
That assumes that no one lost their job. Is that correct?
That's correct. Definitely. These are ideal conditions.
Ideal conditions. Now, based on their assessment, considering that many have lost their jobs anyway, and that it's possible that even some would have a lower salary, is that 41 billion still the same amount?
No, Your Honor, because a lot of people cannot deliver on their contributions, and a lot of employers have stopped operating. So that has become a figure of strong doubt, and certainly will not be met.
Okay. Have they provided us with any figures?
No, Your Honor. Everyone is still in the dark as to how vituperative the COVID pandemic will affect further the business. That is why we in the Red Cross were trying to provide lower testing so that our people can get back to work and get back the initiative, Mr. President. Not only our people to work, but also the children to go to school. So if we're able to do that, I think we get nearer to that point of 47 billion, and the reduction of the fund life, which mean a loss of 15.4 billion, will be more manageable, Mr. President.
Okay. So it is not really earth-shaking as far as the numbers are concerned.
Not really, Your Honor.
Not really. Huh?
So they would, naman ang mga Pilipino, they would say, oh, magtataas pa kayo ngayon kahit na konti lang.
No, correct. I agree with you. Huh? And like I said, we just passed the create, and we're willing to give up so much of ₱1 trillion for the next 10 years.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. So I just wanted to put that into perspective, no? And why not just make a decision and say that we suspend this for the next 6 months or the next year?
Because I think it's better that the President be the one to suspend, and he gets all the glory, Mr. President.
Okay. Then why not just allow the President to do it?
That's what we're doing, Mr. President. The President will be the one to do it.
No, but it says here that subject to consultations yet. Like I said, it's 10 to 50 pesos.
We're continually pretending to be a democracy, Mr. President. Not Myanmar, but the Philippine democracy.
So one last question. Isn't it that when we crafted this bill in the last Congress, because I did work with you on this measure, no?
Yes, Your Honor.
And we provided for to lengthen the life. Didn't we put a provident fund or a mutual fund here?
Yes, Your Honor. We also provided for non-employment insurance, to which they've already given 1.5 billion.
Correct.
We provided,
First time in our history that we're giving unemployment insurance.
yes, we are. We have already given 1.56 billion, which
Yes.
is credit to the Soto Senate, Mr. President.
Yes.
If I may.
Yeah.
I can see my good kapatid smiling, because that's true. We have
Yeah.
done quite a bit of good here together.
We did propose that amendment. Yes.
Yes.
Soto Senate, yes. And
Of course, the unemployment benefits are good, but
Yes.
obviously for the rest, there will have to be. We'll have to take a look at it again.
yes. And there is no additional cost for the SSS today in terms of the actuarial value, because there is already a mutual fund. Isn't it that the increases should go to that?
Well,
And what is the difference between a defined benefit system and a mutual fund? Di ba,
Well,
ang mutual fund, wala naman fund life na yan. Katulad ng pag-ibig.
I will admit that I am not too sure, Mr. President, on that.
Yes.
But I will find out if you'll give me time.
Yeah.
I will find out.
Yes. The difference is this, no? A
Yes.
defined benefit is regardless of what you put in, you get out what is defined under the law.
That's right. What you put in, you get out.
Yes. No, under a provident fund, what you put in, the more you put in, the more you get out from.
That's right. That's
The more your benefit.
It's bigger.
Under a defined benefit, kahit mababa ang binigay mo, kumpara sa isa na mas malaki, pareho lang ang matatanggap ninyo.
Everyone carries the load.
Yes, and that's why we did that here.
That's right.
Extend the fund life. Now, I don't know if they still understand this, but we did also put those amendments in the previous Congress, Mr. President, no?
Yes.
Okay. So, I do not see any problem na mababawasan yung fund life because we already provided for a provident fund. And like I said, the amounts, regardless, because of the pandemic, ang daming nawalan ng trabaho, talagang hindi nila makokolekta to anyway.
That's correct.
Okay? And that's why I think it would be best to suspend it for the next 6 months or a year. That's fine with me. And I support this bill, and we can just simplify it as elucidated earlier by Senator Dillon. And in the scheme of things, no, hindi naman talaga masyadong maapektuhan yung fund life na to.
Hindi masakit, Mr. President.
Masakit.
It is a feel-good measure na meron nakuha kahit na konti.
That is correct, no? To show that we are providing relief to our formal workers as well.
That's correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to put that on record. I thank the gentleman, the sponsor, for filing this bill and for sponsoring it today. And I just wanted to make a few clarifications and to manifest them and put them on record. So thank you very much. Thank you for the clarifications.
Thank you. The point, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
The
Thank
majority
you, Mr.
leader.
President. The last on the list to interpolate is Senator Risa Ontiveros. May you recognize Senator Risa, please, Mr. President?
Senator Risa Ontiveros, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good sponsor. May I just ask maybe around 3 clarificatory questions of the good sponsor?
We'd be honored to answer them as best as we can, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, good sponsor. At the outset, I was going to say that I understand why we need this measure, but that I also wanted to be sure that the benefits for the workers in the formal economy will not be deferred if the new contribution rates are deferred by the President. I recall, good sponsor, Mr. President, ito rin yung dalawang concerns na in-express ng labor in public about this bill, that they too support the bill dahil talagang marami sa mga manggagawa, empleyado nila, union members nila na unemployed or underemployed dahil sa pandemic. At the same time, gusto nilang siguraduhin na SSS will be around for the long haul para sa kanila. Because indeed, good sponsor, Mr. President, sa panahon ngayon, lalo na kailangan ng bawat manggagawa ang SSS. I will, however, no longer need to ask my first question, good sponsor, Mr. President. Malaking tulong na yung interpellation ng Senate President pro tempore at ng Senate Minority Leader kanina, clarifying that there will be minimal, if any, revenue loss to the SSS with the deferment, that the fund life will not substantively be affected. Walang madededuct sa fund life ng SSS. And that adds to the assurance, good sponsor, Mr. President, na the long-term viability of the SSS will not be compromised. Tama po ba yung impression na nabuo sa isip ko, good sponsor, about that, if you will, prejudicial question?
Tama po yan because katulad ng sinabi nga ni Ralph Recto, Senator Recto, hindi naman ganun kalaki ang mapipigtas sa SSS at talagang makakagaang yan doon sa mga taong nawalan ng trabaho, yung may trabaho at pagbalik ng mga may trabaho, at least mahahabol pa yung tinatawag nating objective natin. Sa pangkasalukuyan, kung di natin itinaas to last 2 years ago, hanggang 2032 na lang yung fund. Ngayon, pagka tumuloy na ito, hanggang 2054 na po ang lifetime itong SSS fund.
Alright, salamat, good sponsor, Mr. President. Double assurance po yan sa mga miyembro ng SSS na makakagaan sa pagtaas ng contributions nila ngayong second pandemic year, and at the same time, yun na nga po, lalong overtime, lalong humahaba pa pala yung fund life nila sa SSS. So just 3 particular questions, Mr. President, good sponsor, about the SSS benefits, even during the possible deferment for 6 months or up to 1 year. Una po, good sponsor, how much has the SSS paid in terms of, speaking of unemployment benefits, no? In terms of unemployment benefits from last year to the present?
Ang nabigay po ay 1.56 billion. So first time po yan to 120,439 beneficiaries. First time in history po yan.
Thank you, good sponsor. Malapit din yun sa figure na nakuha ko sa report in October 2020, also from DOLE, 1.5 billion. So mas precise yung sa good sponsor, 1.56 billion. Although the report I received, good sponsor, was that this was disbursed for 18,000 workers who received the unemployment benefit so far. So the good sponsor is saying that this was actually given out to 120,000 workers.
We got, Mr. President, 120,439 beneficiaries.
All right, thank you, good sponsor. That's a quite significant correction to the figure I received that Doles reports that 420,000 workers were laid off in 2020, but that only about 20,000 workers had received their unemployment benefit. So that would have been less than 5% of those who'd been laid off. But the figure that the good sponsor gives us tonight is that 120,000 have benefited. So about 25% of those who were laid off in 2020.
Yes.
Thank you, good sponsor. Did the SSS inform the committee that they would have no problem settling unemployment benefit claims of the complete magnitude of the 420,000 workers, or about 300,000 workers left who have not received unemployment benefits? And what is the SSS's projection for the number of those still to be laid off this year, 2021?
Well, the SSS has set aside a reserve fund of about 581.65 billion, Your Honor. So may naka-reserve sila dyan na pwede nilang matulungan yung mga tao natin na nahihirapan. And let us pray na matapos na itong COVID para hindi na kailangan gamitin niya para mas safe ang mga tao natin.
Amen, good sponsor. We all pray for that. And in the meantime, did the SSS assure the good sponsor that this 581 billion in reserve funds would be able to cover the unemployment benefits of the balance of 300,000 laid off last year?
They did not give any indication whatsoever, ma'am, because hindi pa nila alam kung ano extent talaga nitong COVID. But we were not able to ask them that question because the answer would be thoroughly difficult, because you really have to have a very good crystal ball to find out how many more people are going to lose their jobs.
Although, good sponsor, I was asking about the balance of 300,000 who, according to Dole, lost their jobs last year. And I hope with the good sponsor that the $500 billion plus in reserve fund will be able to cover them.
I'm sure they will be able to cover that.
All right, thank you for that assurance, good sponsor. And well, indeed, it would be hard to predict how many will still be laid off for 2021. But I hope that the SSS can come up with some kind of projection so that they can come up with some kind of preparation for the unemployment benefits.
We will continue
of
to
those
engage them
workers.
for that information, Mr. President.
Thank you so much for that, good sponsor. And I do also understand that the SSS promised to submit financial reports and even simulations, and maybe the answers are already in there, Mr. Chair, and we can just study those further submissions of the system.
That was why I was quite confident to say that we will continually engage them, Mr. President.
Yes. Thank you, good sponsor. To my second question, may assurance din po ba tayo na yung maternity benefits ay tuloy pa rin na maibibigay ng SSS even if we mandate the President to defer increase in contributions for 6 months and up to 1 year?
I'd imagine so, Madam Senator, Priscilla, because napakaliit naman talaga yung naibibigay, and I'm sure, especially since women have become a very, very important segment of our population, no longer ignored but actually held high insofar as their contribution to the country. The SSS will continue to provide for the maternity benefits. In fact, I might even consider paternity benefits as well, Mr. President.
I agree with that in principle, good sponsor, and I count on the good sponsor's assurance about those maternity benefits and hope that the SSS will hold up their part of that obligation. And just for my last question this evening, good sponsor, may assurance din po ba tayo na yung naunang dagdag na 1,000 pesos na pension ay tuloy pa rin na maibibigay ng SSS kahit meron tayong magiging ganitong deferment ng bagong rates?
Yes, Your Honor, they told us that that was going to be given because it was given by the incumbent almighty, and they will try to make sure that they follow the incumbent almighty, Mr. President.
Thank you, good sponsor. Of course, I know the sponsor jests in part because we only assigned that term almighty to another being, but indeed, the incumbent administration nangako nga po sa ating mga pensioners na yung second tranche na iyon, na 1,000 pesos na pension increase ay may aabot sa pensioners bago matapos ang termino ng presidente. So with the good sponsor's assurance that even throughout a possible deferment of 6 months up to 1 year, magpapatuloy ito, then we can hope that that continued honoring of the pension commitment will continue until the end of the administration. So those are just all my few questions, good sponsor, Mr. President. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, good sponsor, and maraming salamat, Mr. President.
And very good questions to that. And forgive me for having periodic jests. These are not happy times for me, as well as for the country because of all our problems. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
No apologies necessary at all, good sponsor. And like all the other members of the chamber, I earnestly appreciate your continuing with this interpellation and your injecting humor into our long work today, even on top of your personal sorrow. Thank you so much for that generosity. Salamat po muli, Mr. Good Sponsor at Mr. President.
This lady is so kind, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr.
Yes,
President,
Short.
Senator Villanueva was a short intervention, Mr. President.
Senator Villanueva, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This is not to interpolate our good senator, good chair. It's a short manifestation. Just like to put on record that this representation joined the hardworking chair of this committee. He was so busy, Mr. Chairman, doing hearings left and right, from the spate of killings to the blue ribbon up to this particular measure. We just want to put on record how the good chair is working very, very hard despite everything, and even at this very point in time when we all thought that he should be resting or doing something else. We just want to put that on record, and we admire the hardworking spirit and servanthood spirit of our dear colleague, Senator Dick Gordon. I also would like to put on record the reason behind the proviso of being consulted, no, yung pong other sectors of the workforce, because during the hearing, some members of the shipping company and other labor sector had asked that they would be part also of the consultation because they are afraid of the fact that the SSS would lobby against the deferment of the increase. And so I think that is just the reason behind it. But I think all of us would agree that this is very important. And now that our people are struggling to make for a living, a lot of unemployed Filipinos, 3.8 million Filipinos, a lot of them, millions also, have adjusted with their work arrangements and salary adjustments. This particular measure would really help them. And again, I'd like to congratulate in advance our dear colleague, our hardworking chair, Senator Dick Gordon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I'd like to state here that Senator Villanueva has never failed my expectations of him. He's been busily attending hearings and coming out with excellent contributions as well. And you can see the sincerity of his heart in favor of our suffering labor. And I'm glad that we have him in the Senate. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Right, Majority Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would like to add for housekeeping lang, Senator Grace po would like to be made the co-author of the measure, Mr. President, for the record.
All right, we place that on record.
Thank you. There are no other members who wish to interpolate the measure, Mr. President. I move that we close the period of interpolation.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpolation is closed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to await the possible amendments of Senator Drilon, I believe he was proposing some amendments. If it's all right with our dear sponsor that we can suspend consideration of the measure first while we have, or would you like to tackle already your committee amendments, Mr. President, of our dear colleague, and then await the individual amendments after?
We can wait for the next session day, Mr. President, so that we can prepare adequately for all the amendments that have to be done. And in fairness to Senator Duran's amendment, Your Honor, we shall
Yes.
also try to interpret these the Senator Duran's amendments to suit his and his very fine wisdom into the law, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So with that, Mr. President, we move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2027. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration suspended.
Mr. President, just a few housekeeping matters before we suspend with the permission of our colleagues as the latest of the hour, and I know the Senate President has been there the whole day. Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the Committee on Rules to the Committee on Basic Education, Arts and Culture as primary committee, and to the Committee on Higher Technical and Vocational Education as secondary committee, Senate Joint Resolution number 10. This is a joint resolution creating the Congressional Oversight Committee to review and assess Philippine education. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, no other matters in our agenda until tomorrow in the afternoon, Mr. President. I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, February 10, 2021. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, February 10, 2021.